The spade bit into the soil with a sound like a heavy sigh. Elias pressed his boot onto the worn metal, leveraging his slight frame until the earth gave way. He tossed the clod of dark soil and tangled roots onto a growing pile, the motion already a familiar rhythm in his muscles. It was the first cut of thousands he would make. Above him, the small cabin his grandfather had built stood exposed on the shoulder of the hill, leaning into the prevailing wind as if it were tired. Below, the valley spread out in a patchwork of green and gold. His dog, Boro, a great white beast with amber eyes, lay with his head on his paws, watching the work with an air of profound patience. He had watched Elias grieve, and now he watched him dig. The two activities seemed to him, perhaps, much the same. It was Silas Blackwood who spoke first. He appeared at the edge of the property, leaning on the rickety fence post that marked the boundary. He was a man carved from the same timber as the hills, his face a map of 70 winters. He watched Elias for a full 5 minutes, a cud of tobacco working in his jaw, before he finally called out, "What in God's name are you doing to your grandfather's land, boy?" Elias paused, wiping a sleeve across his brow. He drove the spade into the ground and looked at the older man. "Improving it." Silas spat a brown stream onto a thistle. "Improving it? Looks to me like you're trying to bury the place. That's a fool's errand. You'll have that whole hillside down on your roof come the spring thaw. Your granddaddy built that cabin high for a reason. Good drainage. Catches the sun." "I have a plan," Elias said, his voice quiet, not argumentative. He turned back to his work, the conversation already over in his mind. The words were just noise against the steady purpose of the digging. Boro lifted his head, gave a low woof that was more of a comment than a warning, and then settled again. Silas Blackwood shook his head, the gesture slow and full of pity. "A plan," he muttered to himself, turning to leave. "The boy's got grief-addled. Thinks he can fight the mountain with a shovel." The plan was not his own. It was his grandfather's, laid out in a series of leather-bound journals filled with spidery script and intricate, impossible-looking diagrams. Elias would read them at night by the light of a kerosene lamp, Boro snoring softly at his feet. The old man had been an observer, a quiet scholar of wind and earth, sun and snow. He had filled pages with temperature readings, notes on soil composition, and theories on thermal mass. "The earth is a blanket," he had written. "It holds the deep warmth of summer long into the cold. A house should wear it, not sit upon it like a stone on ice." The diagrams showed the cabin not as it was, but as it could be. Nested into the hill, flanked by deep, descending terraces, each level a step down into the planet's steady heart. One drawing was annotated with careful temperature predictions. First level, 14 degrees warmer. Second level, 28 degrees warmer. Frost line stops here. It was a madman's dream, or a genius's blueprint. Elias did not know which, but it was all he had left of the old man, and he would see it built. Weeks turned into a month. The trench Elias was digging became a wide, deep cut into the hillside, a raw wound of clay and stone. He worked from sunup to sundown, his hands, once soft, becoming thick with calluses that split and bled and healed again. He learned the language of the earth beneath his feet, the stubborn resistance of shale, the soft give of loam, the surprising weight of waterlogged clay. He bought timber from the mill down in the valley, hauling the heavy beams up the slope on his back, his muscles screaming in protest. With these, he built the first retaining wall, a solid bulwark of raw pine, 10 feet high and 40 feet long, anchored deep into the bedrock he'd spent 2 weeks clearing with a pickaxe and pry bar. Eleanor Vance brought him a blueberry pie one afternoon. She was the valley's matriarch, a woman whose kindness was as reliable as the seasons. She set the pie on a tree stump and watched him work, her brow furrowed with a gentle concern. "Elias, honey," she began, her voice soft, "Silas tells me you're digging." "I am," Elias said, pausing to drink from a jug of water. "He says you mean to build down into the hill. Is that right?" "Yes, ma'am." She wrung her hands, a gesture of deep-seated worry. "Child, no one builds into a hill like this. The water, the pressure, it's not safe. We're all worried about you, up here alone. It's not right for a boy to grieve this way, punishing himself with labor." "It's good work," Elias replied, picking up his shovel. "It'll be safe. I have a plan." The phrase had become his shield. It was all the explanation he would offer, because the full truth, laid out in his grandfather's strange books, would only sound like deeper madness. He thanked her for the pie and went back to leveling the earth behind the new retaining wall. He had moved 340 barrows of soil by then, each one a small victory against the mountain. Eleanor left the pie, but she took her worries with her, spreading them through the valley like dandelion seeds on the wind. The story grew. The orphaned boy on the hill had lost his mind. He was digging his own grave. By the first frost, the first terrace was complete. It was a wide, flat expanse of packed earth, held back by the timber wall, creating a new level of ground 10 feet below the cabin's original foundation. He had begun excavating beneath the cabin itself, carefully shoring up the structure with temporary posts as he dug out the earth for the first sunken level. It was dangerous, back-breaking work. Boro never left his side, often sleeping in the cool, dark space he had just cleared, as if to test its stability for him. Lena, Silas Blackwood's granddaughter, was the first to ask a different kind of question. She appeared one crisp autumn day, not with pity or advice, but with a canteen of fresh water and a look of genuine curiosity. She was quiet like him, with observant eyes that missed nothing. She watched him set stones for the foundation of the new lower wall. "Why stone here?" she asked, her voice clear, "and wood up there?" Elias stopped, surprised by the question's practicality. He pointed with a dirt-caked finger. "The wood is for holding back the dry soil. The stone is for the living space. It breathes better. It won't rot with the dampness from the earth." She nodded, considering this. "My grandfather says the weight of the snow will crush it all." "He's thinking of a roof in the open," Elias said, turning back to his work, fitting a heavy fieldstone into place. "My roof will have 10 feet of earth on top of it. The earth will insulate. The snow will insulate the earth. It will be stronger, not weaker." "It'll be dark," she said, not as a criticism, but as an observation. "I'm building a light well," he said, gesturing to a section of the plans he'd laid out on a flat rock. She came closer, crouching to look at the strange drawings. She saw the intricate designs for airflow, for channeling winter sun deep into the structure through a glassed-over shaft. She saw the logic in the madness. "You've thought this all through," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "My grandfather did," he corrected gently. From then on, she came by every few days. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes she just sat with Boro, watching Elias work. She didn't speak much, but her presence was a quiet counterpoint to the valley's chorus of doubt. Her belief, unspoken as it was, felt more solid than the retaining wall he had built. Winter was coming. The winds grew colder, carrying the scent of snow from the high peaks. The work became a race against time. Elias framed the walls of the first sunken level, built the heavy timbered roof that would have to bear the weight of the world, and began the slow process of covering it with the very earth he had excavated. He installed the windows on the south-facing wall, thick panes of glass he'd paid for with the last of his grandfather's money. He built the stone hearth and chimney that would serve this new, lower room. Mr. Harding, who owned the largest farm in the valley, rode up on his horse one afternoon. He was a man accustomed to getting his way, and he did not like what he saw. "Blackwood was right," he boomed, not bothering to dismount. "You've made a mess of this hillside. It's an eyesore. When that thing collapses, it's going to send a river of mud right down toward my lower pasture." "It won't collapse," Elias said, not looking up from the flue he was mortaring.
"That's what they all say," Harding scoffed. "Just want you to know, when it happens, I'll be sending you the bill for the damages. You're a fool, boy. Wait until the deep freeze comes. Wait until the real snows. We'll see how your plan holds up then. Wait until winter." The words echoed in the valley, a mantra of doubt, a promise of failure. Elias heard them in the whisper of the wind through the pines. He felt them in the ache of his bones. But he also felt the deep, resonant thrum of the earth around him, the solid promise of his grandfather's vision. He finished the flue, and as the first flakes of snow began to drift down from a gray sky, he lit the first fire in the lower hearth. The stone absorbed the heat, and for the first time, in the deepening cold, the half-buried room felt warmer than the cabin above it. Boro came and lay before the fire, sighing with a deep, shuddering contentment. The work was not finished, but it was ready. The first snows were light, a dusting that outlined the strange new contours of Elias's home. The villagers would point up at the hill, at the cabin that seemed to be sinking into a series of giant man-made steps. The raw earth of the terraces was now white, the timber walls dark against the snow. It looked stranger than ever. Silas Blackwood, passing on the road below, would shake his head. "The ground will freeze 10 feet deep," he told anyone who would listen. "It'll heave that whole mess of wood and stone apart before January is out." Elias ignored them. He spent his days finishing the second terrace, a level deeper still, creating another 40-foot-long, 10-foot-high wall of earth. This level would remain unfinished for now, a deep, sheltered cut in the hill that served as a massive windbreak. His work had changed. He was no longer just digging, he was managing a system. He cleared the snow from the light well, ensuring the low winter sun could still reach the windows of the buried room. He checked the drainage channels he had so carefully laid, making sure meltwater was guided away from the foundations. Inside, the difference was astounding. The upper cabin, the part of the structure still exposed to the wind, was cold. A fire in the old hearth fought a losing battle against the drafts that snaked through the log walls. But descending the new, narrow staircase he had built into the earth was like entering another climate. The first sunken level was quiet. The howling of the wind was a distant murmur, a rumor from another world. The air was still and held a remarkable warmth. Elias kept a thermometer on the wall. The temperature outside might be 10 degrees, but in the lower room, with a small banked fire in the hearth, it was a steady 64. Without a fire, it never dropped below 50. His grandfather had been conservative. The difference was more than 14 degrees. It was a pocket of perpetual autumn carved into the heart of winter. Lena came to see it, her eyes wide with amazement as she stepped down into the warmth. She ran a hand over the cool stone of the interior wall. "You can feel it," she whispered. "The warmth is coming from the stone." "It's the earth," Elias said. "The heat stored from the summer. The fire just helps it along." He showed her the ventilation system his grandfather had designed. 2 narrow shafts, one for drawing cold, fresh air down past the warm chimney flue to preheat it, and another to expel the stale air. It was a living, breathing house. "They're all wrong about you," Lena said, looking at him with an expression he had never seen before. It was not pity or curiosity, but a deep and unwavering respect. "They just don't understand." "I don't need them to understand," Elias said. "I just need it to hold."
The real winter arrived in the second week of January. It came not as a storm, but as a presence. A deep, predatory cold that settled over the valley and did not leave. The temperature dropped to 10 below zero and then 20. The river froze solid. Old trees, their wood brittle with age, cracked in the forest with reports like rifle shots. The valley hunkered down, smoke rising from every chimney in a desperate, unwavering plume. For Elias, it was the first true test. The upper cabin became almost uninhabitable, the water in the bucket by the door freezing solid overnight. But the lower level remained his sanctuary. The temperature held. The earth blanket, as his grandfather had called it, was working. The deep cold could not penetrate the 10 feet of soil and rock that shielded him. He began the process of moving all his essential supplies, food, firewood, tools, into the lower level. He even built a small, insulated pen for his 2 chickens, and they clucked contentedly in the relative warmth. Burrow spent all his time on the rug before the hearth, his old bones grateful for the steady heat. The project was no longer an idea or a construction site. It was home. A home that was proving itself every day. The talk in the valley shifted. The mockery lessened, replaced by a grudging curiosity. How was the boy on the hill surviving this cold? His chimney smoked less than anyone's, yet he was still alive. Silas Blackwood grew quiet. His own home, a sturdy farmhouse that had stood for a century, was consuming firewood at an alarming rate. The cold was relentless, finding every crack, every chink in the old walls. He would look up at Elias's strange, half-buried cabin and feel a flicker of something he could not name. It was not yet respect, but it was the quiet death of certainty. The blizzard began on a Tuesday. The sky, which had been a hard metallic blue for weeks, turned a milky cataract white. The wind picked up, not in gusts, but as a solid wall of force that drove the snow horizontally. It was not a normal snowstorm. The flakes were small and hard, like pellets of sand, and they filled the air in a blinding, suffocating torrent. Within hours, the world was gone, replaced by a churning vortex of white. Elias was prepared. He had brought in enough wood to last a month. His larder was full. He secured the outer door of the upper cabin, packed snow against it to seal the cracks, and retreated with Burrow down into the earth. Down in the quiet, he could barely hear the storm. The wind's scream was a high, thin whistle coming down the chimney flue, a sound from a distant, tormented planet. He sat by the fire, reading his grandfather's journals, feeling a profound connection to the old man's quiet wisdom. Burrow slept, his flank rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Outside, the world was ending. Inside, there was peace. The storm raged for 3 days. It did not stop. It did not lessen. It simply continued its relentless assault. The snow piled up in monstrous drifts. It buried fences, then sheds, then the first floors of houses. The weight was immense. On the 3rd night, Elias heard a sound, a faint scratching and a desperate, muffled cry. It was coming from the upper cabin. Burrow heard it too, his head snapping up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Elias took a lantern and climbed the stairs. The wind howled in the exposed part of the house. He unbarred the door to the outside and found it blocked by a solid wall of snow. The scratching came again, frantic now. He put his shoulder to the door, but it wouldn't budge. He grabbed a shovel. It took him 20 minutes of furious digging through the packed snow that had fallen down the stairwell to clear a path. When he finally forced the door open, a figure stumbled in, covered in snow, half frozen. It was Lena. "The roof," she gasped, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "The main beam in the farmhouse. It broke. The snow was too heavy. It's collapsed. Grandfather sent me." Behind her, stumbling through the tunnel she had clawed through the snow, came Silas Blackwood, his wife, and their 2 young grandchildren. They looked defeated, their faces gray with cold and shock. Silas, the man of unwavering certainty, looked at Elias with eyes full of a terrible, humbling fear. "Our fire is out," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "The house is full of snow. We'll freeze." Elias said nothing. He simply stood back and held the lantern high. "Come down," he said. He led them down the narrow stairs, out of the screaming wind and into the deep, steady calm of the earth. They stopped at the bottom, speechless. The air was warm. A small fire crackled in the hearth. The chickens clucked softly in their corner. It was impossible. They had come from a world of white violence into this pocket of serene, ordinary life. Silas's wife began to cry, quiet, racking sobs of sheer relief. Lena helped her to a bench near the fire, wrapping her in one of Elias's blankets. Silas Blackwood walked to the center of the room. He looked at the stone walls, the heavy timbered ceiling, the clever vents circulating fresh, warm air. He put his hand on the earthen wall, feeling not the killing cold he expected, but a neutral, almost living coolness. He looked at Elias, at the quiet boy he had called a fool, the boy who had spent a summer punishing himself with a shovel. "You knew," Silas said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an admission of a truth he had been too blind to see. "Your grandfather. He knew a storm like this would come." "He knew the earth was stronger than the wind," Elias corrected quietly. Before dawn, more came. Harding, the wealthy farmer, arrived with his family, his bravado gone, his face etched with desperation. The roof of his grand 2-story house had held, but 2 of his northern windows had shattered in the wind, and the cold was pouring in. They couldn't keep the fires lit. He offered no apologies, only a desperate plea. "We saw your light. We have nowhere else to go." Elias let them in. Then came the Vances, Eleanor's husband carrying her, her foot broken when she slipped on the ice in their freezing kitchen. By the 4th day of the storm, there were 17 people sheltered in Elias's sunken home. The small space was crowded, but it was alive. They shared what food they had brought, pooling it with Elias's stores. The children, recovering from the cold, slept soundly near the fire, oblivious to the apocalypse raging just a few feet above their heads. The adults sat in a kind of waking awe, speaking in hushed tones. They were refugees in a sanctuary built by the one man they had all dismissed. Silas Blackwood rarely spoke. He spent his time watching Elias, observing the quiet, efficient way he managed the shelter. He saw how Elias checked the vents, how he rationed the firewood, how he moved with a calm purpose that seemed unshakable. He was not a boy playing in the dirt. He was an engineer of survival, a student of forces none of them had ever thought to study. The storm finally broke on the 5th day. The wind died, and a profound, ringing silence fell over the world, broken only by the sound of dripping water. When Elias finally managed to dig a tunnel out from his upper door, the sight that greeted them was one of utter devastation. The valley was buried. Only the tops of roofs were visible, strange triangles floating on a sea of white. The snow was piled in drifts 20, sometimes 30 feet high. The world they had known was gone, erased. But from the strange, terraced hillside, a thin plume of smoke rose steadily into the crystalline air, a sign of life in the silent, frozen landscape. The aftermath of the great blizzard was a time of reckoning. The valley was isolated for 2 weeks before the roads could be cleared. In that time, Elias's home became the community's heart. It was the only place with reliable warmth, the only structure that had not been breached or broken by the storm's fury. The people he had sheltered worked together, digging out their homes, salvaging what they could, but they always returned to the warmth of the terraces. The change in their perception was absolute. Their mockery had been scoured away by the storm, replaced by a deep, humbling respect. They looked at the retaining walls, the deep-cut earth, the low-profile roof, and saw not an eyesore, but a fortress of brilliant design. They no longer saw a grief-addled boy. They saw a visionary. It was Silas Blackwood who made the first move. He found Elias reinforcing a section of the upper retaining wall where the snowmelt was causing some slump. For a long time, the old man just watched, his hands in his pockets. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I owe you an apology, son," he said. "More than that, I owe you my life, my family's lives." Elias just nodded, tamping the earth with the back of his shovel. "I called you a fool," Silas continued, his voice cracking slightly. "I stood on my fence line and I laughed. I was the fool. I was so sure I knew how the world worked, I never stopped to think it might work some other way." He gestured to the terraced earth. "I want to learn. I want you to teach me. I don't want to live through another winter like that in a house made of sticks." That was the beginning. Soon, Mr. Harding approached him, not with threats, but with an offer to fund the purchase of any materials needed, for Elias and for anyone else who wanted to rebuild. "My money is no good if my family freezes to death," he said, his pragmatism now aligned with this new reality. Eleanor Vance, her foot healing, organized the women to cook and manage supplies, turning her concern into practical, powerful action. Elias, a man of few words, taught them with his hands. He didn't give lectures, he gave demonstrations. He took out his grandfather's journals, the pages worn and stained, and showed them the diagrams. He walked them through the principles of thermal mass, of earth sheltering, of passive solar design and natural ventilation. He taught them how to read the land, to see the slope of a hill not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. That spring, the valley was not just rebuilding, it was reimagining. Under Elias's quiet guidance, they began to transform their homes. They didn't all dig as deep as he had, but they applied the principles. They built thick earthen berms against the north walls of their houses. They added stone-faced sunrooms on the south sides. Silas Blackwood, with Elias's help, began the ambitious project of terracing his own land, building a sunken workshop that would be warm enough to use year-round. The valley began to wear the earth like a blanket. Years passed. The raw scars on the hillsides healed, turning green with grass and wildflowers. The terraced homes blended into the landscape, becoming part of the mountain itself. The community became known for its resilience, a pocket of quiet innovators who had learned to live with the harshness of the north, not by fighting it, but by embracing it. Travelers would pass through and marvel at the strange, beautiful architecture, the homes that looked as if they had grown from the ground. Elias and Lena married. They raised 2 children in the terraced house, adding a third, deeper level for their growing family. The house was a living thing, always changing, always adapting. Elias never lost his quiet nature, but he became the valley's anchor, the keeper of the knowledge. He was the man they turned to when the winds blew cold and the skies threatened snow. Boro grew old. His great white coat turned silver, and his movements became slow and deliberate. His amber eyes, once sharp and watchful, grew cloudy, but they never lost their loving patience. He spent his last years sleeping by the hearth in the lowest, warmest level of the house, the place of ultimate safety he had watched Elias carve from the hill. One autumn morning, as the leaves were turning gold, he did not wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep, in the warm heart of the home he had guarded. Elias carried his old friend in his arms up to the highest terrace, the one that caught the first light of the morning sun. He buried him there, overlooking the transformed valley, and placed a single, smooth river stone to mark the spot. He stood there for a long time, his hand on the stone, feeling the deep, silent grief of losing a witness to his entire life. More years passed. The children grew up and had children of their own. The valley prospered. The great blizzard of their youth became a legend, a story told to frighten children and to remind the adults of the lesson the mountain had taught them. And at the center of the story was always the quiet boy who dug when everyone else laughed. Elias grew old too. His back, once straight and strong from a lifetime of labor, became bent. His hands, thick with the memory of stone and timber, were gnarled with age. But his eyes remained clear and observant. He would sit with Lena on the bench on the upper terrace, looking out at the valley, at the homes nestled into the earth, at the thin plumes of smoke rising from chimneys that burned less wood than any in the territory. He saw a legacy not of words, but of warmth, of safety, of life. When he died, the entire valley mourned. They buried him on the highest terrace, next to the simple river stone that marked Boro's grave. They carved a marker for him from a great slab of granite, and on it they chiseled the words that Silas Blackwood had spoken so many years before, words that had become the valley's creed and Elias's epitaph. He knew the earth was stronger than the wind. Long after the last person who had known him was gone, the house remained. It stood, or rather, it nested, a part of the hill itself, a quiet testament to a man who listened to the wisdom of the earth. The terraces he had carved with a single spade had become soft, green steps. The timber walls were gray and weathered, but they held. The stones he had set were covered in moss, but they were firm. And deep within, in the silent, waiting warmth, the house held the memory of a boy, his dog, and a plan that had saved them all. It held the proof that sometimes the most profound strength is found not in standing against the storm, but in digging deep and letting it pass over.